Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information with some laughs, might I add. Gallifrey stands. Wow, this is for the Doctor Tribal deck, because on ETB you return all of the Doctors from your graveyard to your hand, and it has an upkeep clause if you have all 13 in play, you win the game, and it also cheats Doctors into play. If you could pull that off, that'd be impressive. Seems really hard to do. I wouldn't recommend anyone to do it, but we as Magic players like the challenge, I think.
Not as hard as I would have thought.
Day of the Moon. All chapters are the same. You pick a name and then you go to creature. Not bad for 3 mana. You could buy some significant amount of time with this card. Hopefully, it's not just you and someone else, because then this card is useless to you. It doesn't work when it's just 2 players left in the game, so it's a mechanic that gets significantly weaker with time. For 9 mana, you get to phase out your creatures and then deal 4 damage to each creature and then exile them if it would die. 9 mana to do everything is pretty taxing. I guess the other sweet part about this card is it's instant. So you could play this on someone else's turn and get a Cyclonic Rift. I think this will be an expensive card. Genesis of the Daleks. Make a bunch of Daleks on the first 3 chapters. Give people the choice again. We'll just say it's the choice. All Dalek creatures and each of your opponents lose life equal to the total power of Daleks that died this turn, or destroy all non-Dalek creatures. Now that's a pretty good choice to give people. The best card in the game is Factor Fiction, because the decision's actually hard. There's plenty of cards that give players choices and the decisions are way too easy to make, and this has a Factor Fiction kind of like feel to it in terms of difficulty. K9 Mark 1. I have a buddy that mentioned that this looks like Goddard from Jimmy Neutron. I definitely see it. Gives a static effect of giving everything ward 1. Can give a legendary creature unblockable, and it's a companion. Yeah, this is a dirt cheap card. If you're playing Voltron, I think you'll like this card. It's a feel bad for your opponents to be trying to remove this because of how efficiently costed it is. Run for your life. You give up to 2 creatures evasion, and then you could recast this with its escape cost. If you're playing Distortion Strike just so you could get in, then I don't see why not run for your life as well. It has a home in certain decks. I'm not all that crazy about it. In terms of application, it is an instant, and it doesn't specify what you could target, so you can make some backroom deals with your opponents and be like, hey, I'll make this unblockable so you could kill this player. You could do that with this. That's kind of nice. Crisis Conscious. It's a board wipe for token decks because you could either destroy all tokens or destroy all non-land, non-token permanents. Dang, that is brutal. So you build your board up with tokens.
There is safety in numbers, my dear.
And you blow up everything. That includes the planeswalkers, the enchantments, the artifacts. This is a pretty sweet board wipe. Riversong's Diary. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, it gets exiled by this artifact. And then once it has 4 or more, then you get to start casting a copy at random every upkeep. It kind of reminds me of Oversold Cemetery a little bit in that regard, only this cares about instants of sorcery, so it's a cool card. For the imprint ability, denying people's instances of sorceries from their graveyards is also a very useful effect. There's tons of things that have flashback or have some kind of version of flashback, and you rob that from people with this card, so I like it. Blink. Oh, it goes back and forth. That's a new thing. It has 4 chapters, so I just assumed that 2 is implied, but no, it goes from top to bottom, then back to top and back to bottom again. It's a removal saga that forces people to shuffle a creature into their library, and they investigate. And then chapters 2 and 4 are that weird angel we already talked about earlier. Interesting, but it doesn't have the shuffle clause like the angel. It's like they took that angel and split it into 2. I like the design of this card. It's really cool. Probably because this is a first for Magic. This card lets you draw cards from the bottom of your library, and then whenever an opponent scries, surveils, or searches, you put a counter on this, and it deals damage equal to its power to a player. I feel like searching your library happens a lot in Magic, especially in the more competitive scene. This thing could rack up a ton of damage. And then you could power her up by alternative means, like with equipment or counters or auras, whatever, and make people really nervous about tutoring their library. I like a good punishment for doing the strongest thing in the game. The top clause is also something you can manipulate. There are a lot of things that do like bottom of your library shenanigans. If you could put specific cards in the bottom that you want to draw, that just sounds sweet. I feel like there's a lot of tutors that do this. There's a lot of permanents, like Rito Lantern puts things on the bottom of your library. You get value from your graveyard, I guess, with this commander. Chapters 1 and 2, you mill 2 cards from an opponent and then they exile their graveyards. On the final chapter, you put all the exiled creatures onto your battlefield as 2/2 Cybermen artifacts. I think you're just pursuing a lot of sweet creatures with unique activated abilities or ETB triggers, and there are a lot of creatures that are worthy of that. I don't even think you care about the stats of those. You just get a ton of them and you steal a bunch of cool creatures and at the same time hose people's graveyards. It seems like a sweet card. I love it. The Valeyard. This is another commander that gives additional votes to you yourself. The top clause also forces people to make a choice a second time.
On the one hand, I have the overwhelming love I have for myself, and on the other, the raw, seething hatred that I have for you.
I'm worried that there's not enough support for this. While the bottom clause is you could play this in a bunch of like Will of the Council kind of decks where you're voting just in general. So at least it's not a total dud. Missy. So whenever a non-artifact creature you control dies, it gets flipped over face down as a 2/2 Cyberman artifact. And then at the end step, your opponents face a choice. They either receive a damage for each artifact creature you control, or you draw a card and chaos ensues. It's a reference to plane chase cards. It's the chaos roll on those cards. You just automatically trigger the chaos. That's really sick. There hasn't been a commander that's specifically cares about plane chase cards. I think this is a first, so that's really cool. I don't know, in the comments below you could tell me if there's another one out there, a legendary creature that you could play from the command zone. March of the Machine deck list that also had plane chase cards in them. I don't even think any of the legendary creatures or cards put in those decks did anything like this, so that's very sweet. Davros Dalek Creator. You don't just automatically get the Dalek. An opponent has to lose 3 or more life, and then the person that did lose that much life faces a choice. They either let you draw a card or they make an opponent discard a card. If you manage to slug everybody for at least 3 damage, the card advantage could really add up on this. I imagine you get a mix of both, but that's some sweet value for 4 mana. It really feeds into itself too, because the 3/3 obviously will cause people to lose 3 life because it has evasion. It's a 3/3 Minache creature. He himself also has menace and is a 3/4. I really like the design on this card. I think he kind of topples the Nico Bolas, the Ravager, because I think most people are playing that just for the discard effect, and this happens on every end step as long as the life loss condition is met. The Flux, I could respect the density of this thing because it's a removal spell, it's also a card advantage spell, and it has a little bit of an explosiveness with the mana chain at the end of it. The Foretold Soldier. It's a 6/6 creature that must be blocked. Can't be blocked by more than one thing. Weird. Whenever this creature deals damage, you exile it face down, and it becomes Foretold. At least the foretell cost is cheap. I found this card to be pretty medium, and then they added the clause that forces it to be exiled.
Every decision you've made led us from bad to worse.
The total turn off of a card, and if you ask me. Yasmin Khan, Doctor's Companion. It has an impulse effect for just 1 card to tap it, and you have to wait for a revolution on the table. And it's also 4 mana. There's just a lot of like lukewarm parts to this card that I don't like about it, so I don't see it being played as a companion that much. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you put a counter on it. The cool part about it is you could have a Doctor Companion and get a automatic trigger with this if you cast it after you cast the 13th Doctor. The other clause that's desirable on this is it untaps each creature you control that has a counter on it on your end step. Seems like a good Tim kind of strategy. If you happen to be a Tim deck and also making counters, you'll probably want this. For 4 mana, you tutor a doctor, and then on the second chapter, you make a food and a human, and make all doctors 1 less to cast, and then you get to make a copy of something on your final chapter. For Nox, it's a white version of Phyrexian Arena. You get to draw a card on your your pre-combat main phase has a very classic white condition on it, and that it has vanishing, so that kind of sucks. White can't have a non-conditional anything, it feels like. Face of Bow, 0-4 for 4. You could cheat suspend cards into play. I really like this card a lot, actually. And you're in the right colors for untapping it and doing it again. The first thing that comes to mind is the balance suspend card and just pissing people off that way. Just cheat it into play, no big deal. It does suck that you can only activate it on a sorcery, so you're forced to only do this during your turn. Untapping this on other people's turns is worthless. Rose Tyler, it's a Doctor Companion, gets a +1/+1 counter for each time counter on it. Dang, this thing could get big really fast. When it attacks, you put a time counter on it for each suspended thing and each other permanent that has a time counter on it. Probably one of the better Doctor's Companions we've seen so far. Seed of Death kind of lends itself to token strategies because chapters 2 through 6, you make a copy of it. Most tokens are insignificant. Like, I'd play this in my Volo deck because I make a lot of significant tokens in that deck. Having more copies of them sounds sweet, but if you're making copies of a 1/1 elf, it's like, why play this card? Sarah Jane Smith, another companion. It has an easy investigation trigger. It just limits you to just once a turn. This would be a good companion for your Flash Doctor, because then now you get to make clue tokens with it. Fourth Doctor is really good because it lets you play and look at the top of your library at any time. Making a food token is just like the cherry on top. You know what I mean? Like, I could care less about the food token. It's just that I could dig from the top of my library. It's super desirable. And it's from the command zone, which the only other like future sight effect that is a legendary creature, there's the reality chip, and then there is the Elsa Jeskai creature. This feels a little more open though, because it cares about historic stuff. I imagine historic decks will like this, if not the commander. Partings of the Ways. The first chapter is pretty significant. You exile 5 cards from the top of your library, and then those cards gain suspend equal to the CMC. And then the second chapter is just like a little cracked out because you time travel twice, and then you get to accelerate through those cards. I think this would be a pretty decent like storm card, because all your spells are cheap, or just like in competitive Magic in general, spells are cheap. You could probably cheat a lot of stuff into play and have a really explosive turn on that second chapter. The destroying artifacts feels just random. I don't know why that's there. 10th Doc. When this guy attacks, you exile cards from the top of your library till you exile a non-land card, and you put 3 time counters on it. And then for a 7-mana sink, you get to basically cheat that card into play for free. What's interesting is the exiled cards in between that non-land thing and that card also get exiled. They don't get suspend counters, so every land you hit with this ability, you're not getting back.
Forever.
So just keep that in mind. But this kind of feels like a really fair version of a Urza activation. It has limitations. The fact that you could time travel 3 times is pretty sick. I imagine when you pull that off, you have more than just one thing suspended, and you could have a really explosive turn with this guy. That is all of today's spoilers. If you liked what you saw, I'm going to be covering all the spoilers of Doctor Who, so subscribe, and you'll be notified of my next video. Hope everyone had a great time. Have a great day. Bye.